Hello and welcome to another installment of Beards and Cars Rivals. And for those who are new to this series, basically what we do is take two or more high-performance cars and pit them in a head-to-head showdown. But unlike many journalists and outlets and videos, we're not just talking straight-line performance, we're not talking about test track lap times, that kind of stuff which is fun but doesn't really mean much in everyday life. We're talking about those things and more. So yes, we will be covering performance, but we'll also be covering practicality, comfort levels, what can you buy one of these for, and can you actually use them every day? And of course, ultimately, to compare your thoughts at the start of the video to your thoughts at the end. So which one do you enter this Rivals match preferring, and maybe have you reconsidered based on some of the facts and figures at the end, or do you still feel the same? And of course, as I always like to say, if you've owned one of these cars, or maybe even both of them, or just driven them or are a fan of them, tell me your thoughts down below. Which one do you prefer? Which one, for instance, did you prefer if you were an owner? Maybe some ownership stories or concerns or warnings that you would have for other potential owners as well. And to touch on this particular match, well, it's a very personal one to me. The most personal one of Rivals so far, in fact, because the XK has been a returning face. Of course, the most popular episode was the 4.2 versus the 5 litre. Another pretty popular one, although slightly unorthodox, was the XKR versus the 4-door XFR, which was a very personal one to me as well. And of course, we did the BMW 6 Series GT Showdown also. This one is easily the most personal to me, because both sides have a big stake for me. Because on the one side, you have my favourite brand, Maserati. I will openly contradict them, and I have done in many videos, but I still love them, and they are my favourite marque overall. However, unlike the XKR Showdown from before, where I featured a silver 4.2, well, this time we've got a black one. And the reason why is it's my car. So I'm invested in both sides of this match, and the reason why I'm featuring my own car this time instead of that silver one is simply put to keep the visuals fresh so that you don't have to watch the same stuff over and over again if at all possible. So without any further ado, let's get straight into it. Now first of all, we have the production runs. They're very similar on these two cars, and to do a little bit of housekeeping on the two vehicles, you might be wondering, why am I featuring what is clearly the 4.2 litre XK instead of the 5 litre up against what appears to be a Maserati MC Stradale? That doesn't seem like a fair match, or even the same kind of price bracket. Well, to clear that up, the reason why I'm featuring my Jag rather than the 5 litre is because actually it's much more of a perfect rival to the Maserati in question. Engine-wise, price-wise, and even when it comes down to their model year. Secondly, because it's not an MC Stradale, it just has the visual kit of one. This is in fact an original, like 2007 era 4.2 car. Albeit, of course, with some very nice visual and audio upgrades. But underneath, you should have in mind that 2007 shape Maserati, as in the thumbnail, because that's exactly what it is. Now, the production runs on these two models, in particular, first of all, the Jag. If you're looking at a 4.2, because again, the 5 litre would have been too OP for this match, and it's just not the same league of cars from a different year, different engine, etc. This one runs from 2006 to 2009. That's the kind of license years you're going to be finding, for instance, on Auto Trader in the UK. For the Maserati, also on Auto Trader, you'll find around 2007 to 2012. So the Maserati came out a little bit later, but also ran a little bit longer, whereas at that point the 5 litre Jag was in effect. And of course, isn't really a fair rival to this car, considering that this is the base model of the Maserati. Now, it's in terms of the engine where things get really interesting, because it highlights the drastic differences between the Jaguar approach to a V8 and the Maserati approach, or let's be honest, really, the Ferrari approach, because it's a Ferrari Maserati engine, with most of the emphasis on Ferrari there as far as construction goes, much in the same way as my own Quattroporte had. Now, they both have 4.2 litre V8s, so pretty good matchup, first of all, but the Jaguar is supercharged, whereas the Maserati is naturally aspirated. Now, that, you would think, gives a massive advantage to the Jag, surely, kind of like turbocharging an equivalent-sized engine. But interestingly, the Maserati actually stacks up very well when it comes to not having a supercharger but still putting out a ton of power, because the Jaguar with that supercharger puts out 420 horses. The Maserati with nothing, no turbo, no supercharger, puts out 400. That's only a 20 horsepower difference with no supercharger, but also it's the way the engine delivers its power and torque and the revs and the sound, which is so drastically different between these two cars, and I think that difference between the engine styles will easily be one of the single most important things for a potential owner to consider, especially if you get the chance to test drive them both, because put simply, the Jag is much lazier, and that's one of the reasons why I love it. The engine never feels like it's working that hard. It's just got effortless torque. You barely ever get into higher revs. It redlines at somewhere around 7,000, so it's not exactly a high revving screamer of a V8 engine. And it never feels like, as I said, the engine's working that hard. It never breaks a sweat. It's just effortless, raw British muscle. And I love it for that. Now, the Maserati, on the other hand, well, it's exactly what you'd expect from a Ferrari engine. It's technically the same size, but the piston bore and stroke is different. It's a much higher revving engine, no supercharger whine, no turbocharger whistle, just that pure high-pitched V8 howl, especially in the case of this one with the upgraded exhaust. And the way it delivers the performance and power, it's much more like a race car. It feels much more like a track day toy, even in this standard form with no extra power, than the Jag does. The Jag feels every bit like a long-distance GT. The Maserati also does, but it feels like a long-distance GT that's about 20 or 30% track car as well. But for those who prefer comfort, don't necessarily let that put you off, because we're going to come back to that in a second. In fact, the Maserati has some interesting advantages when it comes to being a GT that you would probably never expect. Now, in terms of the power and torque, I touched on the fact, of course, that the Jag has 420, the Maserati has 400, so of course, purely technically speaking, the Jag does win there. Unsurprisingly though, it's the torque where the Jag really sets itself apart, thanks to the style of V8 and of course the supercharger as well. It has 413 pound-feet, and as any of you who watch Beards and Cars reviews regularly will know, I am a sucker for torque. I will almost always choose high torque over high power, such as in my Touareg V10. Torque is just so effortlessly useful on a daily basis for a number of reasons, ranging from performance to reliability to even fuel economy. Now, the Jag has, as I said, 413 pound-feet, which is 560 newton meters. The Maserati has way less, 339 pound-feet, which is 460 newton meters, a whole 100 newtons less. So the power is close, but the torque is completely different. Can you feel that difference while driving though? That's the real question. Well, when I drove this Gran Turismo, of course it wasn't on a clear sunny day, but that was kind of a good thing because it allowed me to feel what the car was like in actual British conditions, not a perfectly sunny, sticky track day. And actually, I was deeply impressed by how good it felt. In fact, unlike my Quattroporte, which is a longer, larger, much heavier car, a good 200 kilos on top of what the Gran Turismo weighs, which itself is not a lightweight car by any stretch, with the Quattroporte it never felt to me like it had enough torque. It would spin up the rear wheels very easily, and for such a long, heavy car, it just felt to me, honestly, like the wrong kind of engine. It was a super sports car engine in a limo body, and although that sounds cool, it's just not really that useful on a daily basis. In the case of this car, it's lighter, shorter, sleeker, better weight distribution, better center of gravity, everything about it just feels more appropriate to that kind of engine. So the lesser torque is actually barely notable. You never feel like you're lacking for power and torque. The fact that you just have to rev the car a little bit higher to get that power and torque, well, you could view it as a disadvantage, but let's be honest, it's an excuse to hear that sound. So you're never going to be complaining when you're actually driving one. What about performance though? Because of course all this power and torque is all great, but what do they actually do with it, considering that the Maserati is heavier? Well, actually, this is where the Maserati really shows off its prowess, because yes, the Jaguar does have a supercharger. It has more torque, a lot more torque, and it has more power. But the Maserati is still faster. Both of these cars have rear-wheel drive, they're both from the same time period, they both have flappy paddle options, and yet the Maserati is the quicker of the two. Now, not by much, but quicker is quicker. The top speed doesn't have a limiter, so it's around 177, 178 miles an hour. The Jag, from what I hear, can do about 174, 175, so they're pretty close. The Maserati is negligible, you could say, but still technically quicker. And in terms of acceleration, the Jag, you're looking at 4.9 seconds on this model, about 4.8, some say 4.7 in the Maserati. So again, very close, but technically, the Maserati is superior, which for a heavier car with way less torque and less power is very impressive. But now that we've talked about the top trump side of things, what about actual use? Does that performance actually matter when you're cruising in it, when you're doing a long distance run? If you're even going to potentially daily drive the car? Well, actually, yes it does, because the Maserati is a whole lot better than you'd be expecting. Now, I'm not going to focus, of course, completely on the Maserati, despite my love for the brand. The Jag is an outstanding GT car. The comfort level is great, in my opinion, for what it is. The handling is smooth, and the Maserati, although definitely far more focused through corners, and definitely, in my opinion, would give you a better lap time, you can feel that immediately. In a day-to-day basis, I think most people would probably side with the Jaguar in terms of being more comfortable, to the surprise of no one. In my opinion, though, if you actually take a step back from your fandom, and I think this is where my love for both cars comes into play, I would actually say that the Maserati is deceptively comfortable. Like, really comfortable. More comfortable than my Quattroporte, in fact, which is kind of shocking for a limo in comparison to a GT. Another way in which the Maserati has a surprising advantage is when you look at the back seats. Now, a lot of people might not care, but the fact that you're looking at buying a 2+2 GT probably means that, at least on some level, you do care. And if you do, well, the Maserati may even be the car for you, because just look at the rear seats in comparison to the Jaguar. They are larger, far more comfortable, the legroom is better, and the space in the back of the Maserati is simply superior, and that's all there is to it. Now, the interesting thing is, the approach that these two cars take to space is, in a similar way to their engines, so similar and yet so different. The Jag opts to go for smaller rear seats with a much larger hatchback style trunk. The Maserati goes for a notchback trunk, in effect, which is just its own little compartment on the boot where you can't get into the car through it, but makes up for that with much more rear passenger space. So again, it really depends on what you want. With the Jag, you technically have 4 seats, but the rear ones are very small and very cramped. The Maserati could genuinely fit a decent-sized person in the back. Maybe not in complete comfort, but certainly more than the Jag could. The sacrifice is a little bit less loading space. The trunk, for instance, on the Jag tends to be longer and wider but shallower. The Maserati a little bit deeper but doesn't go as further into the car. So again, it depends on what kind of loading space you want and need. Now we come to something else which is very surprising, and that is economy. Now, of course, many people won't care about economy, but as an XKR owner myself, I can tell you that just being able to afford one doesn't mean that you don't care about fuel economy. I do care, and I like to get the best economy out of a car because to me, that represents more impressive engineering. So how do they stack up? You might think the Jag surely got to win easily here, and on paper, interestingly, it really does. The official quotes on the Jag are 16 to the gallon in the city, 35 on the highway, which is very good, and an average of 25. Compare that to the Maserati now. The Maserati is quoted at 11 in the city, 23 on the highway, and 16 average. So not even close really to what the Jag can do. And a lot of that is because of two things: the efficiency of the supercharger and the torque. But here's the fascinating thing, because if you actually go to the real-world aggregator sites where owners of the cars put in the numbers that they actually get instead of the official stuff, well, interestingly, the tables turn. Not a complete reversal, but actually they end up being the same. Both the majority of owners of 4.2 XKRs and Maserati GranTurismo 4.2s report getting about 23 to the gallon average. So yes, on paper the Jag is better, but in practice, they're basically equal. And this really turns the tables in an unexpected way, because you probably weren't expecting that to be even close, but get this. The biggest single advantage that the Maserati has, probably in this whole match, apart from maybe the rear seats, is the fuel tank. For whatever reason, the Jaguar has a strangely small tank. It's a 71 litre, which is 15.6 UK gallons. The Maserati has an 86-litre tank, which is 18.9 gallons. That's not only bigger than the 4.2's tank, that's bigger than the 5-litre as well. So in other words, even if this rivals match were between the 5-litre Jag and this Maserati, the Maserati would still win on fuel tank range. And it wins by a lot, because if you work out the average real mileage that owners get out of either car, combined with, of course, the size of the tank, if you run it from completely full to crawling into a petrol station, which of course very few people would actually do, although I've done that a few times myself, but if you actually were to do that, or even just in general conditions filling it up at a low level, the difference in range is pretty massive. The Jag can peak at about 360 miles. Now personally, I sometimes get a little bit more than that. I've even had close to 380 out of it. But even with that, driving very frugally, the Maserati simply blows it out of the water with a range of 435 miles. Now of course the tank is going to cost you more to fill, so I'm not saying that it's a cheaper car, it's simply an advantage in long distance driving. So if you actually plan to use it for its intended purpose of being a long distance fun GT tourer, then you can simply go much further between stops in the Maserati. And that is probably the last advantage you would ever think a Maserati would have over this particular Jaguar. Now the time has come, of course, to talk prices. How much should you pay and how much can you pay if you're willing to take a risk on either of these two cars? And of course, as I've often said, any car, literally any car, is always a risk when you buy it. It could break the next day. I've certainly had that happen. I've had it happen the same day, in fact. So what can you find these for? Well, this is another advantage, of course, for the Jag, because the 4.2 is even cheaper than the 5-litre. In the case of this 4.2 Jag, currently, toward the start of 2021 at least, you can find an XKR 4.2 for between 10 and all the way up to £33,000. Now 10 grand is going to get you a 6-figure mileage car, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend buying one for that price myself, but 33 grand is a little bit extreme in my opinion as well. For that, you're looking at like the last of this generation with about like 5,000 or 7,000 miles on the clock. So if you want a mint one, like a brand new car in effect, then sure, go for it, but it seems a little bit pointless for the vehicle in question, at least in my opinion. What about the Maserati? Well, as you'd expect, the Maserati's entry point is higher. On the lowest end of the spectrum at the moment, you're still going to be paying about 16,000 for one, so it's a good 6 grand more than a bad condition, quote-unquote, XKR. That's a big difference. But on the higher end, interestingly, it's actually a little bit less than the Jag. For a really low mileage original 4.2 Maserati like this, you can pay about 30,000, which is about 3 grand cheaper than the equivalent super low miles Jaguar. So it's interesting how they compare, but it's really when it comes to my recommendation of what price you should be looking for that they get much closer and much more realistic in their range. See, I would recommend looking for a Jag like this from 12 to 22,000. Now 12,000 will get you a great one. Mine, for instance, was 12.5. 22 will get you a really nice mileage, great condition, super loved one with like 40,000 miles on the clock tops, which of course would be a really nice one to go for. The only problem with that is you can also get a pretty nice 5-litre XK for that as well if you're so inclined. When it comes to the Maserati, I would recommend looking at the 20 to 27,000 region. This particular one, for instance, is about 24,000, even with those upgrades. So again, you can get a really nice car for that. This one is in fantastic condition, no issues whatsoever. So in terms of price range, 12 to 22 compared to 20 to 27. So the consistent thing is the Maserati will set you back more, and to me that is the most important takeaway from this entire Rivals match against the Maserati. The simple fact is it is more expensive, and that's probably why many people would say, well, in that case surely the Jaguar almost automatically wins because you get so much more car for the money. Is the Maserati even worth buying for that much more, even if it were the same, potentially, if you're not really getting anything that significant over what the Jag can do? It's a valid question and a valid argument, and even as a Maserati fan, I bought the Jaguar, so that kind of tells you a lot as well. I will say though that if you can afford to look into both, you shouldn't dismiss the Maserati, because it has a number of, as we've covered, very surprising advantages. It is quicker. It sounds far more ruckus and over the top, even without the aftermarket exhaust. In terms of space in the rear seats, the Maserati is superior. In terms of fuel range, shockingly, the Maserati is superior as well. Whereas on the side of the Jaguar, I would give its advantages in terms of stuff like torque delivery, which is much more effortless and lazy. It has an advantage in long distance smoothness rather than comfort. And what I mean by that is the Maserati actually has really comfortable seats and, in my opinion, really nice suspension. It's a very surprisingly comfortable car. But to me, there's a difference between a car being comfortable and a car being relaxing. And what I mean by that is actually down to the engine. See, the Maserati is very comfortable to sit in, but it's very loud and playful most of the time, at least in this particular form. And of course, it's not quite as loud in a stock version. But it wants to play more than the Jag. The Jag is completely happy with just lazing it all the way there, if you want to, like an old school gentleman's Jag. The Maserati wants to play more, and even though it's not going to be getting its tail out through every corner by any stretch, it's actually a very civilized car, surprisingly so. I think most people would probably give the edge to the Jag, although I think there's actually more consideration you should have there than just dismissing the Maserati. Interestingly though, I think the advantages that either car have might surprise you, especially on the side of the Maserati. Now, of course, one of the biggest issues that people will worry about will be reliability. And this is one knock against the Maserati again, because the Jaguar is, from what I've heard and seen, and of course experienced between my own Jaguar and my Maserati that I had, albeit a different one, the Jag is definitely more reliable. Now, some people have a Maserati for years with no issues. But again, you can say that about a lot of cars. You could have a TVR with no issues, but then you could have one that's absolutely horrendous. Once again, that's always the calculated risk. When it comes to the Jag, the parts though and the servicing and the maintenance are really, to me, what make the difference. It's cheaper. Parts are a lot cheaper for a Jaguar than they are for a Maserati, because in effect you're buying on one side Jag parts and on the other side Ferrari parts. So of course one is going to be a lot cheaper than the other. It's not to say that a Jag is cheap to run, but it's cheaper. You can run a Jag on GT money. You can run a Maserati on full-on exotic money, and that is the difference. So I would say that the Maserati is a car which, even if you don't like it as much as the Jag, even if you don't like it at all, you honestly, trust me here, you owe it to yourself to drive one at least once. I don't ask you to love it. I don't ask you to buy one. Please just try it. I think you may be surprised by how capable a rival this Maserati is to the Jaguar, even in ways that you would think the Jaguar would automatically win at. Overall, I would say that academically speaking, the Jaguar is a safer option, but the Maserati in many ways is a better option. Performance, space, even economy. And that is an interesting result that you probably weren't expecting. Overall though, that's it for my thoughts. Tell me down below which one did you prefer at the start of this video, and have I perhaps surprised you or maybe even changed your mind? Ultimately, if you get the chance to test drive one or both, definitely do so. As a former Maserati owner, a current Jag owner, and a driver of multiple ones of both, I adore both of these cars, and they are so similar in so many ways but so different in many ways as well, that it's a fantastic rivalry between the two. So of course you can click right here on screen to check out my other rivals matches, for instance other ones featuring the XKs, and you can click the playlist on screen to go straight to all of my Beards and Cars videos, including standalone reviews for either of these cars, if you want to get into more of those individual details. But until next time, of course, stick around on the channel for more rivals matches, and be sure to check out those other vids that I've already done as well. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.